World War I wasn't just fought in trenches. It was fought in vaults, ledgers, and backroom deals. While millions died in mud and barbed wire, governments were doing something far more dangerous. They were inventing a new way to pay for war. In 1914, money stopped being real. Gold was abandoned, debt exploded, and an entire financial system was quietly rewritten. The soldiers paid in blood. You're still paying in inflation. This was not just a war of trenches and artillery. It was not only fought with bayonets and barbed wire. World War I was also a financial war, a war fought in gold reserves, bond markets, central banks, and the quiet offices of financiers who never stepped onto the battlefield. The soldiers paid in blood. The bankers and governments paid in calculations. And the decisions made in those years didn't just decide who won and who lost. They rewired the global financial system in ways that still shape your life today. If you think war is only about politics and armies, think again. The First World War proved that money itself is a weapon, and one of the deadliest ever created. In 1914, Europe was already a powder keg. National rivalries, colonial ambitions, and rigid military alliances had turned the continent into a chessboard of paranoia. But beneath all the speeches about honor and empire was a colder reality. War on this scale required unimaginable amounts of money. Here is the brutal truth. When leaders chose war, they were also choosing debt. Every empire marching soldiers to the front was also marching its population into decades of economic burden. At the start, most governments believed the war would be short. Over by Christmas, they thought they could pay for it the old-fashioned way. Gold reserves, limited borrowing, patriotic donations. Within weeks, that illusion collapsed. The war burned money faster than anyone had imagined. In the summer of 1914, Europe still lived under the gold standard. Paper money could be exchanged for real gold, a system that gave trust to currencies but tightly constrained governments. Gold reserves were finite. You couldn't print endlessly without destroying confidence. Britain, France, and Germany all had respectable reserves. But once millions of men were mobilized and entire industries were redirected toward weapons, costs exploded. Germany was spending over 10 million marks a day by late 1914. Britain's war costs soon reached £2.5 million every single day. The math was merciless. The gold would not last. So governments broke the rules. One by one, the great powers suspended the gold standard. Quietly, they admitted that money was now a promise backed only by faith in the state. This moment, the snapping of the gold anchor, was one of the most important financial turning points in modern history. Money and power were now driven by printing presses, credit, and persuasion. And once governments experienced that freedom, they never truly returned to the old limits. For Germany, isolated by naval blockades and cut off from global capital, the only option was domestic borrowing. The government launched massive war bond campaigns, appealing to patriotism and sacrifice. Ordinary citizens were urged to invest their savings in victory. Over 100 billion marks were raised this way, but it was a structure built on hope. When defeat came, the bonds collapsed in value. Millions of Germans lost their life savings, and that bitterness became fertile ground for extremism in the years that followed. Britain had a crucial advantage. London was the financial heart of the world. Sterling was trusted, and British financial networks spanned the globe. Early on, the government relied on short-term borrowing and patriotic appeals. Soon, however, it turned to deeper pools of global credit, especially the United States. America was officially neutral, but its bankers saw opportunity. Firms like J.P. Morgan became financial lifelines for Britain and France, arranging huge loans and managing the purchase of weapons, food, and raw materials. By the time the United States entered the war in 1917, Wall Street had already been financing the Allies for years. This wasn't charity, it was power. The United States emerged from the war transformed, from debtor to creditor, from financial follower to global leader. France faced its own struggle. Already strained by defense spending in past wars, it relied heavily on borrowing. French citizens were encouraged to buy government bonds, but large portions of funding again came from American capital. These debts would haunt post-war politics for years. Russia's situation was worse. Its economy was underdeveloped, its banking system fragile. Though it held significant gold on paper, it wasn't enough. As inflation rose and military defeats mounted, faith in the ruble collapsed. By 1917, economic breakdown helped trigger political revolution. By the end of the war, the scale of spending was unprecedented. The Allies had spent more than $140 billion, the Central Powers around $60 billion. The old financial order lay in ruins. The gold standard was shattered. Inflation tore through economies. Germany's hyperinflation became legendary, bread costing billions of marks. Ordinary people paid the price, while those closest to power often protected themselves. In a financial war, small savers always bleed first. And here's a connection to today. World War I taught governments that they could finance the unimaginable by detaching money from reality, printing, borrowing, and postponing consequences. This playbook never disappeared. When the war ended, the United States held the world's largest gold reserves and creditor position. Europe was drowning in debt. Britain and France owed billions to America. Financial power shifted from London to Wall Street without a single shot fired. But borrowing creates another war, repayment. Reparations demanded from Germany were enormous and unrealistic. Printing money to pay them destroyed the economy and fueled rage that extremists would later exploit. Britain tried to restore its former glory by returning to the gold standard in 1925 at pre-war values, a disastrous mistake that caused deflation, unemployment, and unrest. Meanwhile, American banks lent money to Germany so Germany could pay Britain and France, who could then pay America. It looked stable, but it was a circular illusion. When the Great Depression hit, the entire structure collapsed. World War I was not just a military turning point. It was the birth of the modern financial age, one where money could be created, narratives could justify debt, and ordinary people bore the cost. When you hear promises that inflation is temporary or debt doesn't matter, remember 1914. Remember how quickly trust vanished. Money untethered from reality becomes a tool of control. Governments will always find ways to fund wars, crises, and bailouts, and they will always make someone else pay. Real wealth is not numbers on a screen. It is knowledge, resilience, and the ability to see through illusions. History does not repeat, but it rhymes. The playbook written in 1914 is still being used today, and the truth is always hidden in the balance sheets.